Good evening, everybody. Firstly, it is wonderful to see so many of you back online. We hope you had a wonderful Pesach with your families. We hope you had a wonderful break, and hopefully you did miss our regular Wednesday night HA Zoom. So we're very blessed to have you all back with us. We had an event on Monday night where we were fortunate to meet some of you in person. It was great to see you. We had Abraham Hamra. We also had Caroline Marcus. That was held in person in Sydney. And it was a great opportunity to have some more pro-Israel advocacy, hear some important messages, but especially for us, our team at AJA, to get out and meet some of you, some of the faces that we see every week online. Really great opportunity to meet you, and we are grateful for that. Tonight, to launch our new series, kicking off after the break, we have an incredible guest that we have been very lucky to get at 6 a.m., Shabbos Kestenbaum. Antisemitism has skyrocketed in US campuses following October 7. The Biden administration failed to respond, and the disruptions eventually spread here in Australia on our campuses. Now, the Trump administration is taking serious measures, including deporting troublemakers and withholding funding. Many believe that the tide is turning now. Tonight, we're going to discuss what are the lessons that Australia can take from the US example. Our guest this evening, Shabbos Kestenbaum, has been one of the leading Jewish activists on campus and has led the fight against his own school, Harvard. Quite impressive. A lifelong Democrat, Shabbos has been invited to speak at the Republican National Convention and endorse President Trump due to the Democrats' failure on anti-Semitism. Shabbos is close to many decision makers in the Republican Party, and we'll definitely hear more about that this evening. Thank you very much for joining us, Shabbos Kestenbaum.
Okay. Hi. Thank you so much for that introduction. And yes, as a recent university grad, there are not many places I would agree to speak at 6 a.m., but the Australian Jewish community is a nice exception. I know my friend AB had a great time in Melbourne and Sydney. He was posting a lot from his flight, so maybe you gave him an upgrade because he was very excited. So two quick housekeeping items. Number one is Ben Shapiro told me a few weeks ago I talk too fast, which is a little weird coming from Ben, but I have been told I talk quickly. So if you find that to be the case, just write in the chat I'm talking too fast and I'll do my best to slow down. And the second thing is you might see me looking down. I'm not on my phone. I just use my phone as a timer because, as you'll see, I get distracted quite easily. In fact, I'll tell you one quick story. I was in a synagogue in Miami a few weeks ago, and about 40 minutes into my lecture, I look at my timer and I think to myself, wow, I'm doing really well on time. And it turns out I forgot to start the timer. So I was ready to keep going, but the rabbi was not very happy. So I will do my best to be brief and then get to all of your questions. Without further ado, in my mind, the story of the anti-Semitism at Harvard University really begins about 100 years ago. The president of Harvard University in the 20s and 30s is a man by the name of Abbott Lowell. President Lowell, like most American Ivy League university presidents, is an anti-Semite. This is someone who believes that there are too many damn Jews at the university, in his own words. And he decides the best way to tackle the Jewish problem is by instituting a quota, a legalized metric of discrimination, a cap on how many Jews are allowed to be admitted into the university. As a fun fact, you can impress all your dates with this. I know I certainly have tried. There were more Jews as a percentage at Harvard University under the quota system than there are today. At its peak, Harvard was 25% Jewish. Today it is 4% Jewish. That's not because Jews got dumber over time. It's because there has been a deliberate and systemic campaign to crack down on the amount of Jews at Harvard University. But to me, honestly, the shocking part of the quota system of the 20s and 30s is its bizarre relevance in the 21st century. There is a woman, you may have heard of her by the name of Claudine Gay, and she decides about 3-4 years ago, when she was dean of what's called the FAS, the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, that words can be dangerous, words can be violent, words can be derogatory. This is right after the George Floyd protests/riots, who was an African-American who was unjustly killed by the police. And so Harvard, because they always have to be better and different than everybody else, they don't use the term Sorry, you're going to see me yawn a couple of times. They don't use the term RA, a resident advisor, which is a graduate student who lives in the undergraduate dorms. They don't use that term. They use the term master of the house, which is not a great term. If I was there at Harvard in 1636 when they voted on it, I would have opposed. But Claudine Gay again decides words are dangerous, words are violent, words are derogatory. So she renames it. It is now no longer called a master of the house. It's now called a dean or a tutor of the house. The problem with that, though, is if you recall our friend Abbott Lowell, the plurality of Jewish students at Harvard University today, as we speak, live in a dorm called Lowell House. They live in the building named after the dude who didn't want them on campus to begin with. So if you want to play this diversity, equity, inclusion game that all minority students need to feel safe and included and welcome, then fine, play the game. As I'll talk about later, I can compare my progressive credentials any day of the week. I marched with Black Lives Matter. I marched when the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, which was the legal provision guaranteeing abortion rights. The problem is Harvard has consistently, historically, and routinely deployed a double standard when it comes to their treatment of minority students and their treatment of Jewish students. And you don't even have to take my word for it. There's an American NGO called FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expressions. And FIRE, about 3 years ago, they decide to rank 248 American universities as to how well they commit and protect themselves, how well they commit themselves and protect the First Amendment. The First Amendment, of course, is the bedrock of American democracy. It is the legal framework providing free speech. Out of 248 American universities, you know what Harvard was ranked? 248th. They were literally ranked dead last when it came to their commitments to free speech and the First Amendment. This is an institution that, rightly or wrongly, I'm not going to state my politics on the issue, although maybe during the Q&A I will. This is a university that routinely disinvites controversial speakers who are deemed transphobic, misogynistic, racist. This is an institution that unenrolled 12 admitted students when it turns out they were posting sexist memes in a private WhatsApp group. This is a university that actually demoted an African-American professor for coming out against Black Lives Matter. This is not an institution that historically has any strong track record of protecting and amplifying free speech in the First Amendment, which makes it very odd that my first month of being a student at Harvard, way before October 7th, the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, which I always say is the largest compilation of intellectually challenged morons I've ever met in my life, they decide to invite Muhammad El-Kurd to come speak on campus. Now, if you haven't heard of Muhammad El-Kurd, good, you're not missing out. He's an idiot. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed that Jews eat the organs of Palestinians. We don't. This is someone who has seriously and openly professed that the Israeli occupying forces have internalized the ways of Nazi Germany. This is someone who has consistently stated that we have to, quote, normalize massacres. And for those of you who have the misfortune of being on Twitter, number one, please follow me. My mom stopped following me so I could use the ego boost. But Douglas Murray follows me, which is very cool. This is someone who has lamented on Twitter, Muhammad al-Kurd, not Douglas Murray, how sad it is that Palestinians can no longer hijack planes anymore. So this is someone the Harvard Palestine Solidarity Committee, with their very high intelligence, decide this is the individual we want to speak on campus for the third time. So we go to DEI. We go diversity, equity, inclusion. We go to the administrators. We go to the interim president, and we say, look, rightly or wrongly, you have this strong track record of disciplining speech you don't like. Why don't you simply apply that logic when it comes to someone who is so vehemently anti-Semitic, he's quite literally appeared on the Anti-Defamation League's top 10 anti-Semites, which, when you think about it, is quite impressive considering how much competition there is to get on that list. And Harvard did something remarkable. They look at us, they shrug their shoulders, and they say, well, he's a First Amendment right. What do you want us to do about it? I mean, it's a shocking double standard. It's blatantly anti-Semitic. And as we'll prove in court, I'm suing them. I'll get to that in a second. It's discriminatory and it's illegal. And in the interest of time, which, as I said, I promise I will be brief because I want to get to all your questions. In the interest of time, I will jump ahead to October 7th. October 7th was, you know what? Actually, sorry, before I do that, I want to tell you one other thing. If you, I don't know how much I'm allowed to talk about politics, but it's funny. When I speak, they usually say, you can't do politics, but I'm talking to Australians, so I think we're good.
Yeah, do politics,
When,
whatever you want.
okay, good. We're going to do politics. So if you Google my name, which please don't, but if you do, one of the attacks I get most often is I'm this conservative, partisan political hack. Which, number one, I don't know many conservative, partisan Republican hacks who voted for Bernie Sanders twice, but that's a different story. But I deliberately went to Harvard University to engage in academic discourse and to challenge my preconceived notions, which is why the very first class I took at Harvard was a class called Religion, Nationalism, and Settler Colonialism, the Case of Israel-Palestine. Oh boy. In this class, which was taught by three professors, one of them was the former spokesman for the internationally designated terrorist group, the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, although again, that's a story for another time. In this class, we were quite literally taught as fact that historically, the Jew has been powerless. And with the advent of the state of Israel in the 20th and the 21st century, the only way the Jew knows how to exert and exhibit their newfound power is, in fact, by internalizing the ways of Nazi Germany, which is how you students can now appreciate why the IOF, the Israeli occupying forces, is so Gestapo-esque in their tactics. And I'm a bit embarrassed to admit this, but again, I'm suing them, so I'm doing my teshuva. But for my final paper, which was worth about 40 or 50% of the grade, I wrote it on Yeshayahu Leibowitz, who's a fascinating figure in Jewish history, with an epilogue. And in the epilogue, I lied through my teeth and I used it to denounce the religious Zionist values I had grown up with. And to this day, it's the only paper at Harvard I ever received an A plus on. And it's not even a very good paper. I use like ChatGPT for half of it, but don't repeat that. There's another class I took. This class was called Narratives in Displacement, the case of Israel-Palestine. As a side note, I was banned from China for 3 years. I have an arrest record in Poland. It's probably why I'm still single. And if you were to spend the last 2, 3 years at Harvard, you would literally not know that China and Poland were countries, because the only country that is singularly obsessed and discussed is what? It's Israel-Palestine. The Religion and Public Life Department, where I studied religion and politics. They've had more than 65 events on Israel-Palestine, which is more events on a country than every other country combined. So this class is quite interesting because in addition to being a regular course throughout the semester, they actually take you to what they call Palestine. I say it's what like they call Palestine because like the Palestine they take you to is like Ben Yehuda Street and they pretend it's occupied territory. And you have to apply. It's very competitive. So I apply because, again, I'm not that misogynistic, conservative, partisan Republican hack. I want to explore new ideas. And during the application, the two professors who were from the previous course, they say, Shabbos, we've never had someone like you apply before. And I didn't know if they meant because I wear a kippah. I didn't know if they meant because I don't believe in nuking Israel off the map. And I said, yes, it's so important I go on this trip because in my insular Orthodox community, we're not allowed to discuss Palestine, which of course is not true, but that's what my professors wanted to hear. And I kid you not, this is what they said. They said, well, we're really concerned. I said, why are you concerned? They said, sorry, a little embarrassed. They said, well, we're really concerned because if we take you to Palestine, which again is like the shook, and we show you the apartheid, the ethnic cleansing, the settler colonialism, the genocide, and mind you, this is all before October 7th. Through the process of unlearning, which is a term so monumentously dumb, only a Harvard academic can come up with it, you will be so psychologically traumatized from that trip you will be unable to reassociate yourself back with your Jewish day school, back with your Jewish synagogue, back with your Jewish community, because you will have realized for 25 years they have been feeding you a diet of lies. And we, as your professors, don't want to be held responsible for that psychological trauma. So they rejected me from the program. I'll tell you one other class and then I'll move on. This class was called Religion and Peace, the case of, you guessed it, Israel-Palestine. They're obsessed. And this professor gets up on the first day of class, and this is fully corroborated by a classmate of mine, Nitzan Plitman at Harvard Law School. And the professor says, in politics, in media, in academia, the Zionist narrative is the dominant narrative, which is laughably wrong, but okay. Therefore, she said, in order to understand both sides of the story, we in this class, which again is called Religion and Peace, the case of Israel-Palestine, will not study, will not discuss, will not learn, will not read any texts if they were written by Israelis. So when people ask me my reaction to anti-Semitism at American institutions of higher learning, my reaction is relatively succinct, which is I am shocked, but I'm certainly not surprised, because this is the inevitable outcome, the ultimate culmination of decades and decades and decades of political indoctrination masquerading itself as academic discourse and intellectual worth, when it is literally nothing other than a deep-seated hatred of the Jewish state and an obsession with the Jewish people. And now, in the interest of time, I'll skip ahead to 10:7, but I have other examples of this. And suffice to say, I actually wrote an article. You can Google this. I wrote an article for H.com called Antisemitism at Harvard. And I wrote it in October of 2022. And I can assure you that no one read the article. But point being, these issues were prevalent. They were already there. And, it's a damn shame it took October 7th for there to be a national and even international conversation about it. Nevertheless, October 7th, of course, was the joyous Jewish holiday of Simchas Torah, of Shmini Atzeret, and we're at Harvard Chabad, which is the main institution of Jewish life on campus. So we're dancing, we're celebrating. I speak to a lot of young people, so I say we drank lots of water, and that was a good joke, but you're all muted, so I'm going to assume you're all laughing. And all of a sudden, we heard rumors. There was a bombing. No, it was a shooting. No, it was a stabbing. The reality is, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here at AJA, but the reality is having a modern state of Israel in the 20th and 21st century unfortunately means there is terrorism. It's not good. We don't like it, but it happens. I studied in the old city of Jerusalem for 2.5 years at a yeshiva called Eshet Torah, and one of our rabbis was actually stabbed to death by a Palestinian terrorist outside of Jaffa Gate. So terrorism happens. It's not good. We don't like it. It happens. So when we heard that there was a terrorist attack in Israel, we were, sad, but in an almost sick, twisted way, it's almost par for the course, right? The problem was, as the night went on, the rumors persisted. And it became readily apparent that what we young American Jews, I'm young, I'm 25. I mean, you're all young at heart, but I'm young biologically. What was happening was something that we young American Jews had never experienced before. And that's what? That is Israel as an existential issue. That's Israel where its legitimacy, its survival, and yeah, its existence was very much called into question. And I'll tell you something funny. I I told you I speak all over the country, and I was in Miami a few weeks ago. And because it's Miami, if you know anything about the American Jewish community, the average age in Miami is deceased. So as I'm telling the audience this, again, I'm going to assume you're all laughing. As I'm telling the audience this, we young American Jews, we never experienced this before. I said, I was 5 years old during the second intifada. I was not alive during the first intifada, the Lebanon War, Suez Canal, 73, 67. And I said, unlike many of you in the audience, I don't remember the 1948 War of Independence. And they got so offended, how dare you? We're not that old. But like half of them actually fought in the 1948 War of Independence. So I don't know what they were angry about. Point being, young American Jews do not relate to Israel in that way. Israel is a place where we go for Pesach vacation. It's where we study in yeshiva. Some of us might move there, but to think of its existence as a question mark is absurd. In the same way, you don't question the existence of Portugal and Brazil and Ireland. Well, maybe we should question the existence of Ireland, but that's a different story. And all of a sudden, on the night of October 7th, we were confronted with a very new reality. I'll say something that might be a a little controversial, that I get some pushback. But the story of October 7th is not the story of October 7th, because Hamas is a dictatorial, tyrannical regime that should be obliterated from the face of the earth. However, they're pretty damn clear as to what their goals are. They have stated openly that their sole goal is the eradication of the Jewish state from the river to the sea. Hassan Nasrallah, the since deposed head of Hezbollah, he couldn't make it tonight. He sends his apologies. He has stated for years it would be great for all of the Jews to pack up and move to Israel. Why? Because it would be so much more convenient to kill you in one location than having to hunt you down country to country. He said this openly. So when terrorists commit acts of terrorism, it's not good. There should be a forceful response, but it's who they are. It's what they do. What we could have never prepared ourselves for, what could not have even been considered conceptually possible, is the most progressive, the most elite, the most educated, the most sensitive, those who take knees for Black Lives Matter, those who introduce themselves with preferred gender pronouns on the night of October 7th, not, you know, months after the fact, on the night of October 7th, as they saw the images in real time on live TV of Jewish women bleeding from their private areas, of Jewish babies like Kfir Bibas crying as he's being hoarded onto a motorcycle by strangers and taken into Gaza, saw the images of burnt, mangled, charred bodies. The immediate reaction of 34 student groups at Harvard University, ranging from the Feminist Society to the Muslim Student Association, was to jump out of bed, some were still in their pajamas, to draft what they called an emergency statement to blame Jews for the largest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust. It's not hyperbole, it's not conjecture, it's not an exaggeration. The statement literally begins, we hold the Israeli apartheid regime entirely responsible for all ongoing violence in the Middle East, end quote. You know how many times these students mentioned or even condemned Hamas? Zero, zero. In fact, there's a great documentary you should all watch. It's free on YouTube. It's from PBS Frontline. It's called Crisis on Campus. Just put it on YouTube. You should watch it. And in Crisis on Campus, they interview me and I give them my spiel. I'm not saying that's why the documentary is so good, although it certainly helped. And they interview three of the leading anti-Israel activists at Harvard Law School. And if you thought the Palestine Solidarity Committee were intellectually challenged, these three girls, the director asks these three students, and this is months after their statement, months after October 7th, they said, given the hurt, given the blowback, given the controversy elicited by your statement, do you regret not mentioning or even condemning Hamas? And these three girls, they look at each other and they do this. Um, no, we didn't think it was relevant. We didn't think it was relevant. I hope you can appreciate what I tell President Trump, what I tell Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate, what I tell the national media. This is not like a Jewy issue or an Israel issue. This is an issue that attacks the very core of our Western civilization, the heart of our American democracy, and the core of our liberal values. Because if you could have the alleged best and brightest of a given populace, a given society, a given campus, who on the night of October 7th can see the murder of 45 Americans and the abduction of more than a dozen Americans, and their immediate reaction is to side with the terrorists who did that thing, that is a profound problem in our society. You know, why do we care about Harvard and Yale and Princeton and Columbia? It's because, unfortunately, these are institutions of higher learning that purport to train the next generation of American leaders. And by and large, they're kind of right. It's not an exaggeration at all to state, statistically speaking, I probably sat in a room with a future congressman. It's like a member of parliament, but with actual power. Sorry, that was my last dig at the Australian political system. But a future congressman, a future senator, even a future president of the United States. And if these are America's future policymakers, if these are America's future judges and jurors, if these are America's future authors of the books your kids and grandkids will read, then I'm telling you as fact, not as hyperbole or conjecture, but as fact, someone who knows those students, who sat in those classrooms, America is at a dangerous inflection point because, yeah, they call death to Israel, but we also know the next part of the statement is death to America. Yeah, they vandalized all my Israeli flags. They vandalized all my American flags. Yeah, they ripped down the posters of Kfir and Ariel Bibas. They also ripped down the posters of Americans like Hirsch Goldberg Poland and Keith Siegel and Omer Nutra. So this is not just an anti-Semitism problem. It is a uniquely and distinctly American problem. And the Religion and Public Life Department, where I took all those crazy classes, they released their own statement on October 9th or 10th. And they say, the opening of their statement actually begins, quote, the great Palestinian poet once said, which is a weird way of starting the statement. And they go on to say, if you begin the story on October 7th and not the story of the 1948 Nakba, not the story of settler colonialism, not the story of the illegal displacement of Palestinians, you'll only get one side of the story. You know how many times those professors mentioned or condemned Hamas? Also zero. So where do these moronic students get their moronic ideas from? It's from the professors. I'm sure during the Q&A, you'll ask me about the foreign funding in Qatar and China and Russia. It's a good question, but ultimately it's not rocket science when you have professors who say, I'm going to cancel class, but if you live in tents and call for an intifada, I'll give you full credit, then it's not a crazy coincidence that students go on and do that thing. You know, 2 days after that, this is October 12th, there's a rally at Harvard University of more than 1,000 students and professors um, with their masks, with their kathiyas, with their glory to the martyrs, globalize the intifadas signs. And one particular idiot by the name of Kojo gets up. Kojo just finished a fully sponsored trip to communist Cuba, where in his own words, he will, quote, take lessons of the revolution and impart them on college campuses, which again, problem for another time. And he gets up and he says in front of these 1,000 Harvard students and professors, Hamas, which by the way is the first and only time Hamas was mentioned in that rally, is not a terrorist organization. We will look upon them in 10, 20 years as freedom fighters. Who are we to condemn the resistance? And you know what the reaction is of America's best and brightest? Thunderous applause. Not one thinks to condemn, to challenge, to walk out of that statement. Not one. Not one. It's no coincidence, therefore, that a week after that, there was a physical assault against a Jewish student at Harvard Business School. It's no coincidence that 2 weeks after that, a Israeli student at Harvard was told by her professor to leave the classroom because her nationality made others uncomfortable. It's no coincidence that a month after that, a Harvard undergrad was spat on for wearing his yarmulke. It's no coincidence that a month after that, a Harvard employee vandalized all of my hostage posters, writing on Kfir Bibas, quote, his head is still on, where is the evidence? Writing on No Argamani that Jews are best friends with Jeffrey Epstein, who then challenged me to debate him in a secluded underpass as to whether Jews orchestrated 9/11, and then posted a video of him waving a machete with a picture of my face saying he wants to fight. He's coming after more than blood. He's coming after me, and he has a plan to bring down the Zionist mafia. You know, I had private armed security outside my house for a week. I had a guy with a gun follow me to Chabad to make sure I was okay. And the icing on the cake is of the dozens of phone calls and emails I sent to Harvard inquiring about his employment status. To this day, they have not once responded to me. You know, it's inconceivable that any other minority group would be treated with the disdain, the disregard, and the contempt that Harvard has historically, routinely, and consistently treated its Jewish student population. And honestly, I'd like to think in the last year or so, I've been somewhat calm, cool, and collected. You're seeing that side this morning because I'm very tired. But there's one thing I will not be able to forgive and I will not be able to forget. And that's what? That's the encampments. You remember the encampments when all of these, you know, students lived in tents for 4 weeks and refused to shower. It smelled terrible. It was like this dangerous combination of BO and communism. It was awful. And forget about the fact that they violated all time, place, and manner restrictions. Forget about the fact that they called for an intifada at all hours of the day. Forget about the fact that Jewish undergrads were living in Airbnbs off campus because they didn't want to be accosted on their way to school. Forget about all that. Every single time I, a visibly Jewish student, walked to class, cut through Harvard Yard, went on my campus, every time I did that, classmates of mine, encampment leaders, they would put on bright yellow safety vests. They would call themselves safety marshals. And when they would see me approaching, they would take out their phone and they would start recording me and they would start following me. And I would ask them why. I would ask them to stop, and they never responded. They would just follow me with their camera. And we told the president of the university and the president of the United States, but again, story for another time, that Jews were being followed and intimidated and bullied on their way to class. And by the way, the National Lawyers Guild, which is a terrible organization that cheered on 10/7, they gave the encampment leaders notepads so they could write down on the last week of the encampments which building the Zionist agitators were learning in. So we told the president we were being followed and bullied and intimidated on our way to class. Not only did the president of the university never respond to us, he actually told the encampment leaders, if you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with the Harvard Management Corporation, which oversees Harvard's $50 billion endowment, to discuss divestment from Israel. If you agree to pack up your tents, we will allow you to meet with senior Harvard faculty to discuss the establishment of a Palestinian Study Center. If you agree to pack up your tents, you know how many students were suspended or expelled of the hundreds of students and professors who took part in the encampments? Zero, zero. You know how many times I've been able to meet with a management corporation or DEI or senior Harvard faculty? Also zero. But if you call for an intifada loud enough, and if you follow Jews on their way to class long enough, and if you vandalize enough property, I mean, they quite literally use bolt cutters to try to break open the gates at Harvard Yard. If you do all of those things, you will be given a seat at the table. And we therefore filed a lawsuit against Harvard last January, alleging gross violations of the Civil Rights Act. Harvard's response when we filed that lawsuit was not to apologize, was not to recognize the reality of anti-Semitism. They filed a motion to dismiss with prejudice, meaning they were asking a judge to toss out our lawsuit and to set a legal precedent so that no Jewish student in the future could hold them accountable for anti-Semitism. When we filed an amended complaint, an update to our lawsuit after the encampments to reflect the growing acts of anti-Semitism, you know what Harvard did? The exact same thing. No apology, no recognition, no negotiating table. They filed a second motion to dismiss with prejudice. And it pisses me off to no end that Jewish students have to be involved in this way. So the word is not proud or happy, but the Judge Richard Stearns of the Federal District Court of Massachusetts, he issued a 25-page ruling against Harvard in July, writing in part, quote, the facts as pledged show Harvard failed its Jewish students. He tossed out Harvard's double motions to dismiss. And as of today, we're the first case in American history pertaining to the civil rights violations of Jewish students on a college campus to actually go to trial. It's never happened before. And this will set legal precedents so that if Jewish students make the mistake of going to these campuses, at the very least, they will have their constitutional protections afforded to them. And I want to end by saying this because I know we're out of time and I want to get to your questions. I'll end by saying this. I was asked to speak at a Trump rally shortly before the election, and it was about 35,000 people in the arena. Of course, almost none of them were Jewish. And it dawned on me, I can't give them the Harvard spiel because one, it sounds elitist, and two, they're not going to connect to it. So what do I talk about? So I start the speech by saying in 1790, President George Washington, the founding father of this country, he writes a letter to the largest Jewish community in the United States. It was a community in Newport, Rhode Island, and it numbered 25 families. That was the largest community then. And he says in this now famous, legendary, almost mythic letter, here in the United States, things will be different. We want you to practice your religion. Bigotry will be granted no assistance, persecution, no sanction. You will be able to practice your religious identity. And I told this audience of 35,000 non-Jewish Trump supporters, how shocked, how appalled, how embarrassed would President Washington be today to know that American citizens are being denied access to education as a direct and sole result of their political and religious identity. And that's what struck a nerve with that crowd. And that's what I'm telling you. I mean, you're not American, you're Australian, but you can relate to it. This is not just an attack on the Jewish people. It is an attack on our country, on our country's founding, on our democracy, and what makes our country so great and so unique. And that is a message. I'm in DC right now, so I'll be on Capitol Hill in Congress today. I was there yesterday as well. That is a message that I continue to raise with politicians on both sides of the aisle, with national media, with anyone who will listen. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak for the last few minutes to get my story out there. And I'm happy to take all of your questions. I'm not sure how you want to do this, though. Should I just call on people to unmute?
Shabbos will take the questions and we'll get
Okay.
people to unmute. But before we do that, we'd like to go. Well, first, we'd like to say thank you. 6 a.m., the way you speak is impressive, your knowledge, your delivery, and every point that you come across, hard hitting. Thank you so much. We'll go first to our CEO, Robert Gregory.
Thank you, Shabbos, for an amazing talk. Before we go to some questions, I just wanted to ask you your thoughts on the effectiveness of some of President Trump's measures he's brought in. So both deporting students as well as cutting funding to colleges. Are you seeing any success?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, it goes without saying, I wholeheartedly support these initiatives. That's why I campaigned and voted for President Trump. It pains me actually that a significant amount of the Jewish nonprofit and establishment with all the money and all the prestige are coming out against these initiatives. I think that's really, really wrong and mistaken. So I'll make two quick points. Number one, no foreign student on a foreign visa had been deported yet. In this country, we have due process, so they're facing detention, they have a trial, and then they're deported. So all this nonsense you might be reading it or hearing in the mainstream media that Trump is obliterating due process cannot be further from the truth. Mahmoud Khalil, who's the Syrian foreign national at Columbia University, who wrote that they believe in the eradication of Western civilization, who organized a protest that sent police officers to the hospital, took maintenance workers hostage, vandalized private property. He's currently in a lawful detention center in Louisiana. He has 19 lawyers, which is like 18 more lawyers than I have. So he is getting his due process. Everyone is getting their due process. It is a total fiction propagated by the mainstream media that people are just being deported in the middle of the night. That's just not true. And then in terms of the funding, yes. So the funding, I'll make 2 points. Leaving aside the anti-Semitism for a moment, Harvard University has a $54 billion endowment, which is more money than most countries' GDP, maybe even Australia's GDP. I don't know. Probably not. You guys are actually you're good. And when I was on the far left of the political spectrum, I remember marching with what was called Occupy Wall Street, this, far left consortment of activists who said billionaires need to pay their fair share and smash the oligarchy. And I find it remarkable that the same far left who said those things are now making a martyr out of Harvard University, saying the Trump administration is stifling their free speech and he's obliterating all due process by cutting funds to Harvard. I mean, what a joke. Why is it that the American people are subsidizing Harvard to the tune of $800 million annually, and they have $9 billion in federal contracts? Again, this is a university with more money than most countries' GDP. But because of the innate and immense Trump derangement syndrome here in the United States, anything Trump does, they automatically have to be against it, even if it totally violates all of their political policies. And then the second aspect is let's bring in the anti-Semitism for a moment. Universities have an obligation under federal law to uphold what's called Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. And Harvard has so obviously failed to do that. They have discriminated against Jewish students. They also were found liable by the United States Supreme Court in June of 2023 for discriminating against Asian American students and their admissions criteria. And rather than following the law, Harvard has dug deeper. They have dug in their heels and said, we're not changing. So what the Trump administration is saying, fine, that is your prerogative. You are a private university. You can have your own internal policies. The only difference is we, as the American taxpayer, aren't going to subsidize it. Harvard wants to have their cake and eat it too. They want to say, we want to teach all the indoctrination we want. We want to discriminate as many students as we want, and we want the American people to pay for it. That's not how it works anymore. And I'm happy that the promises made by the Trump campaign are now promises kept by the Trump White House. So it's already having an effect. You're already seeing universities like Harvard, like Columbia, like Penn, trying to very haphazardly enact new policies and regulations that would protect all students, that would rid themselves of the groupthink and political indoctrination. I believe it's too little too late. I believe, and I speak with the Department of Government Efficiency, the DOGE team, quite often, and I tell them they should just cut all the funding to any institution that has endowments more than $10 billion. I think that would be the right idea.
It sounds like there's quite a bit that the Australian government could learn. We've had a lot of the similar issues here, including universities making deals with the same kind of encampment groups. You mentioned the some of the Jewish groups. What sort of support have you received from Hillel, these type of groups? I saw the American Jewish Committee came out against some of Trump's plans. So what's the establishment Jewish community been like?
Well, yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the American Jewish Committee, the AJC. You can go on their Twitter page because I just left a comment on their Twitter and I ratioed them, which is a youth term of I got more likes than the original post. So you know it was good. They came out against the Trump administration, which I obviously believe is a mistake, especially because a significant amount of the major Jewish establishment and the Jewish nonprofit have done jack shit since October 7th. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have phrased it that way, but they have raised billions of dollars annually. They fundraise off of our faces, young Jewish students. And what have they done to help? I would be hard pressed to tell you practical things. I won't say which ones, but we were actually discouraged by two major Jewish nonprofits from filing a lawsuit to begin with. So I think there needs to be a reckoning in the American Jewish community about how our money is spent and who our communal leadership is. In the same way, there needs to be an October 7th commission in Israel. I think in a similar vein, although lahavdil, I'm not drawing a comparison, but in a similar vein, the American Jewish community needs to have some type of audit or conversation about the leadership really failed. Because if you're an institution that raises hundreds of millions of dollars annually on the slogan of we're combating anti-Semitism, and then you have the worst rates of anti-Semitism in American history, I think it's fair to ask, well, what have you been doing with all the money then? Having said that, though, there are incredible organizations. Chabad is just absolutely astounding. I think all of you should be donating your money to Chabad and to institutions that invest in Jewish education. In the United States, there have been newer and smaller organizations like Stand With Us, the Israel on Campus Coalition, that have really done a lot. They have End Jew Hatred, they have campus fellowships, they have marches, they have letter writings, and I think that's far more effective. Hello?
You're just on mute when you're talking.
Oh.
Thank you, Shabbos. I'm talking away. As we do every week, we'll take a 1 minute pause while we promote our events for next week. If you can see my screen, next week we have General Yossi Krupavasa, Behind the Front Lines, Understanding Israel's Strategic Realities. So coming live from Israel, we're very excited to have him next week. Then you'll notice that David normally does this, so please bear with me as it is my first time sharing. Then we'd also like to inform everybody that on the 1st of June, there'll be the Australian Holocaust Survivors Reunion Luncheon. This is an incredible event that is being put together for the 80th anniversary of the Liberation, 1945, 2025. Please share this flyer. If you need more information, please reach out to us. This is for Holocaust survivors. There is a lunch in Sydney. There is also a lunch in Melbourne, and we need to get this out to as many Holocaust survivors in Australia as we can. So please do support us and help share that. For our young professionals, we have an event, not this Friday, but next Shabbat with Central Synagogue, and that'll be a beautiful Shabbat dinner. Please join if you're not an AJM member, and as always, subscribe and donate if you can. We'll go to our questions. Please be brief with your questions because we have a lot of people to get through, and we'll start with Victor Berger. Please unmute.
I don't know who's talking, but I assume you are on mute.
Yeah, are you able to unmute, Victor?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, now I can hear you.
Shabbos, when you were finishing your remarks about your organizations in America who are not doing much at all, I thought for a moment your mind had drifted to Sydney. But there seems to be a similarity. If I could ask you the question, there seems to be a lack of propensity to litigate in Australia, and the only people who've litigated have been individuals who have to fund themselves. Now, how have they been funded in America?
Sure, great question. And I would agree that litigation is a certainly very effective tool. And I'm actually part of a WhatsApp group of 80 students, American students from across the country. And the only thing we have in common is either we've testified in front of the United States Congress, or we appear on national media, or we filed a lawsuit against our university, which is a very odd thing to have in common, but it really underscores this new wave of young Jewish American activism. This has never happened before. In terms of where we get our funding from. A lot of it is private donations. In my case, it's donors who believe in what we're doing, but there have been American Jewish NGOs like the Brandeis Center, like the National Jewish Advocacy Center, like the Lawfare Project. I'm sure there are more that I'm forgetting that do it pro bono. And there has been a willingness, at least to some extent, of American Jews who are willing to donate to these causes because they recognize that litigation can actually be far more effective than the traditional Jewish establishment and their lobbying efforts. Because as I said, and clearly this is true of Sydney, I guess, if the American Jewish leadership was doing such a good job, then we did not have to, or we do not have to be doing any of this. We have to be doing this because the leadership is not doing a particularly good job. So.
Thank you. Alan Friedman, please unmute.
Thanks, Daniil, and thank you, Shabbos. I think you may have alluded to what I'm going to ask you about. When organisations like the New Israel Fund and J Street see what's happening on the campuses, what do they do, and how much do they get involved?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned J Street in particular, because there's a bill that was passed in the House. The United States Congress has two houses. There's the House of Representatives, and then the Senate. So under the Biden administration, the Republicans in the House passed it. It's called the Antisemitism Awareness Act. And then Chuck Schumer, who's Jewish, he killed the bill. As with any good piece of legislation that would have helped American Jews, he killed it. So the Antisemitism Awareness Act would have really helped Jewish students on campuses. Among other things, it codified the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism, IRA, and J Street came out very, very strongly against it. J Street and other very, very secular and unaffiliated and liberal Jewish religious groups put out a statement about a week or two ago saying that they're against Trump's funding cuts. They're against the lawful detention of foreign students. They're against the university endowment tax legislation. And they posted this on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. And I'd commented on their tweet. I said, okay, given that you are against all of these policies, can you, as J Street, clearly articulate 3 practical things you have done to help American Jewish students on campuses since 10/7? And they never responded because they haven't done anything. So many of these organizations exist solely to be in opposition of whatever Donald Trump is doing. This has been the case since 2016. I know that because I used to be those people who were opposing anything Donald Trump did. They get their money, they get their legitimacy, they get their social media following by just being anti-Donald Trump, no matter how good the policy is. And their focus is not the American Jewish community. Their focus is on outrage and clickbait and money. And it shows. Again, you don't have to agree with what Donald Trump does, but what's your alternative? What is your solution? And they don't offer that at all. They don't offer it at all because they don't have an alternative. They don't have a solution. They just want to be anti-Trump. That is the entire purpose of that organization. And by the way, when I testified in front of the House Judiciary Committee about my experience at anti-Semitism, the Democrats were able to bring in their witness. And the way that these hearings work is the Republicans control the House, so they bring in 3 witnesses who sort of support the claim being made. You know, there's anti-Semitism on campuses, and this is what Congress should do. And the Democrats get to bring in 1 witness, and that's typically a witness who refutes the claims of us. And the Democrats brought in a representative at J Street. So that really underscores their values and their priorities. And it's a shame that so many Jewish organizations in the United States are simply an extension of the Democratic Party and don't actually have the American Jewish interest at heart.
Thank you, Shabbos. Danny Lamb, please unmute.
Okay, just did that. Thanks, Daniil. I can support what you're saying, Shabbos, because I just came back from the States, and particularly a New York crowd, and they're all just Democrat to a man and just totally oblivious of the benefits that the Jewish world and Israel have received from Trump's activities so far. I want to ask you a separate question. Shabbos, here in Australia, an organisation that I was formerly a president of, the Executive Council of Australian Jewry, released a statement congratulating the government on being re-elected. And inter alia mentioned we'll work together on the two-state solution, so to speak. Are roof body organizations, Jewish organizations in the United States, still following this ridiculous idea of a two-state solution?
Tell us how you really feel. The overwhelming majority of the Jewish establishment as policy will be yes in favor of a two-state solution. There are some exceptions like the ZOA. They've been outspoken against a two-state solution for decades now, not just since October 7th. But if you were to, just create a survey of the main Jewish organizations, the ADL, the AJC, probably even Hill International even has an opinion on this, their official position will be yes, a two-state solution. And I'm actually still a registered Democrat. I tried for a year and a half to get my party to get their act together, telling them you are going to lose the Jewish vote unless you do these things. I'll give you one quick example. I went to the Ohel, the grave of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, with Donald Trump on the one-year anniversary of October 7th, and Kamala Harris was invited, and she said no. And I spoke at the Republican convention, but I went to the Democratic convention too, and I said, fine, you don't want to have me speak because I'm a MAGA fascist. I gave them a list of about a dozen progressive Jewish students on campus who've been victimized by anti-Semitism. I said, have them speak. Have any one of them speak for 2 minutes, and I can connect you with them. Have them do it. Why should the Republicans be the only one to talk about anti-Semitism? And the Democrats said, no, we're not interested. So at a certain point, I'm not going to try to help my own party if they don't want to help themselves. And I think that's true of the Jewish establishment. There has been a tremendous or an almost stubborn refusal to recognize that this policy is just unsustainable. It's not supported by the facts on the ground, and there need to be new tactics, but they won't say that. And as I said, I've been so disappointed with the Jewish establishment the last year and a half. It's what a damning indictment that, I'm happy that I'm talking with you guys, seriously, and I'd love to come visit Australia, but what a damning indictment that Jewish students have to become activists and speak to as many groups as possible to prove that these things are happening to us and to solicit supporters, because, we don't have a lot of faith in the adults in the room. Because, they're pushing this nonsense of a two-state solution. They're pushing this nonsense that Trump is a prototype Hitler. And it's just not helping anyone. It's just opposition for opposition's sake. And by the way, before we get to the next question, I would be remiss if I did not mention that when I was at Aish Torah, the CEO, Rabbi Steve Berg, comes up to me and he says, we want you to host, I was 19 at the time. He says, we want you to host a Shabbat dinner on the roof of Aish, which if you've ever been, it overlooks all of the Temple Mount. It's very cool. And I said, okay, who am I hosting? He said, the Prime Minister of Western Australia. I don't remember his name. And at the age of 19, I did not know there was a Prime Minister of Western Australia. I thought it was just Australia. But I hosted him, and I hosted his delegation of about 30 business leaders from across the country. And that was very, very cool. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that.
I do wonder if he was having you on a bit, because we don't know about that Western Australian Prime Minister either. But and be careful what you wish for, because we might just make that visit to Australia happen.
Let's do it.
We'll go to Sebastian. Please unmute.
Hi, my question is, now that the anti-Semitism report has been released, does it help you with your civil rights case against Harvard under Title VI? And could this also put their federal funding or tax-exempt status at risk?
Yeah, great question. And I'm just Googling it, and the guy's name was Mark McGowan, if that makes sense. Mark McGowan.
I think it's our premier.
Is there a difference? Okay, you know what? I know very little about the Australian political scene. Point being, Mark McGowan, I hosted him on the Aish Torah roof at the age of 19. Very cool. Anyway, in terms of your question, yes, the Anti-Semitism Task Force certainly helps our case. You should all read it. It's a pretty brutal read, not just because it's 312 pages, but also qualitatively, it's quite depressing. I mean, you have blatant civil rights violations. So I'll just give you one example. And again, you should all read it yourself. A student goes up to her professor and says, Professor, you paired me up with an Israeli as a study partner. I don't study and learn with Israelis. And the professor said, oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I'll give you a new study partner because I don't want you learning with an oppressor. I mean, that is an open and shut Title VI violation that is egregiously illegal. And that is just a snippet and a snapshot of the illegal practices that Harvard normalized for years. So yes, it helps us. Yes, the tax-exempt status is revoking the tax-exempt status is something the Trump administration has already said they're going to do. It's obviously something that I've been pushing them to do. It's obviously something I campaigned on. Again, leaving aside the anti-Semitism, Harvard has a significant amount of money. And you know how much they pay on their endowment? Every year, 1.4%, which as a percentage is less than firemen and teachers and nurses and students pay in their taxes. So there are currently two pieces of legislation being proposed in the House. One would be to tax their endowments from 1.4 to 10%. There is another version that takes it from 1.4 to 21%, which is the corporate tax rate. Suffice to say, I'm in favor of the 21% one. And I think that will really hurt them. Revoking their tax-exempt status will really hurt them. Withholding federal funds will really hurt them. Ending the federal contracts, which the United States Department of Education has already done as of 2 days ago, that will really hurt them. So I think these are really great steps in the right direction. And yes, I know for a fact the Trump White House has read this report and they're quite disgusted at what it entails. And in fact, the only reason the report was brought to light, it was suppressed by Harvard for about a year, is because the Trump administration told them, if you don't release it this week, we are going to withhold even more money. And Harvard got scared and said, fine, we'll release the report.
Thank you, Shabbos. We are almost out of time, and unlike other Jewish organizations, we typically run to time. Not a very Jewish trait, but we like to keep it on the dot. So our final question for tonight goes back to you. What do we do to support you? What more do we need to do? How do we follow you? How do we further engage?
Well, you could, follow me on social media. You could just type in my name on Twitter or Instagram, Shabbos Kestenbaum. And in terms of what people can do is, look, on October 6th, I was a nerd writing mediocre research papers in the library. I'm still a nerd, but I don't write as many research papers. And I just took to social media and I wrote one stupid post on Twitter saying, this has been my experience. I had 2 followers. One was my mom and one was a Russian bot. And about 2 days after that post, I get a call from a journalist at CNN and she says, we saw your post. I'm like, really? She says, yeah, how would you like to come to the studio to talk about your experiences? And I went overnight from an audience of 2 to 350,000. And it's not because I'm so great and intelligent and articulate. It's simply because there was a recognition that there were very few people saying much of anything. And I especially tell this to young people, don't discount the tremendous impact people can have by simply just doing something, by writing a tweet, by writing to a policymaker, by writing an op-ed, by organizing a rally, by inviting a speaker, by listening to a Jewish student. There is a tremendous amount of good that people can do without actually having to do much. So don't discount your talents. Don't discount in whatever capacity you are in your ability to affect change. And ultimately, what we are fighting for, as I said in my speech, is not just a fight for Israel. It's not just a fight of anti-Semitism. It's a fight for Australia. It's a fight for the United States. It's a fight for our way of life and our civilization. And the product that we are selling is a product that consumers want for the most part. They enjoy the values, the democracy, and the liberalism that our societies believe in as well. And that's what we're trying to fight for. So don't be intimidated. Don't be discouraged by the other side, because our values are the ones that have withstood the test of time and will continue to endure. Jews have been around for 3,000 years, and we will be around for the next 3,000 as well.
Shabbos, that is a beautiful message to end our session tonight. We definitely do want to bring you to Australia, and I'd like to promise everybody that if you do come to Australia with AJA, we will take you to Perth. And I'm sure I'll go with you to relearn my history because my Perth and Western Australian history is not up to date. But don't worry, Perth. Shabbos, if he comes to AJ, we will do the major cities, including Perth, and we will not forget you. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. You do not know how much we appreciate the early morning. I think you were bright, awake. It's not many people who can wake up and be as fabulous and impressive as you are. So it is well appreciated. You can now go back to bed, get a couple of
Yeah.
hours in.
I will. Thank you guys so much. It was really a fun time, and please stay in touch. My email is my name, shabboskestenbaum@gmail.com. So thank you.
You heard it there. Thank you very much, and good evening, everybody.